Everyone hear me? Jen, can you hear me?
I can hear you great.
Okay. So we're going to call this first meeting of the Dayton ADA Commission to order at, what, 3:03, roughly, on the 17th of September 2020. And before we actually start the meeting proceedings, we're all going to rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty, and justice for all. Thank you. So I thought for the first meeting what we would start with, even though most of us know each other at least a little bit, was for introductions, just to go around the room and on Zoom. Jen, thank you for joining us by Zoom, by the way. And just say a little bit about who we are and why or how we got here. 30 seconds kind of thing, or a minute or less. So I'll start with me. I'm Jonathan Gale, and I'm the coordinator of ADA for the town of Dayton, and have been doing this for a little over a year now. And the goal of having a coordinator in Dayton is to work with the commission, which we're starting today, to work on helping the town become as accessible as possible over the years as time goes on, so that everyone in the community, whether you're a senior, whether a young person in a wheelchair, person who is blind, person who is deaf, cognitive developmental disability, doesn't matter, so that we give everyone who has different disability over time as much access as possible to all of the town's resources, the internal resources, the external playground resources, the schools, everything. It's a long process that will take many, many years over time, and unfortunately a significant amount of dollars. But part of our job is going to be to ferret that out and help prioritize and put things in order and come up with a plan while we're working on things that are already on our table to begin to focus on. My background, so that everybody knows quickly, is I have been involved in ADA in one capacity or another for the past 40 years, starting with my oldest child when he was a small child who is special needs. And I was living in Canton at the time, got involved in parent advocacy and educational advocacy and the old 766 plans and so forth as well. From there, it morphed into working with people with different disabilities and representing families in schools. And for the past 12 to 15 years or so, I have been devoting pretty much full time to the advocacy work that I do. A lot of it is spent working on legislation for different states, helping to write legislation, do new legislation, lobbying efforts, things like that as well. So that's, and doing a lot of work in trauma centers, teaching things related to disability and teaching discrimination, teaching docs and nurses how to work with folks with disabilities and so forth as well. So I have a lot of background. I hope that'll come in handy. I think it will. I'm CAM certified, which is community access monitoring, which is a lot of what we're going to be working on in the near future, related to things in the town that have to be constructed, reconstructed, new, renewed, whatever it might be as well. And that's a little bit about me. So Ken, you are our liaison.
Sure. So I'm not a voting member of this committee. I'm representing the Board of Selectmen. I've been a selectman for a couple of years now. I've been involved in different committees, specifically the CBA.
I am unmuted.
Yeah, I can hear you. Yep.
So I'm the representative for the Board of Selectmen. I am not a voting member of this committee. This has been an interest of mine for many, many years. My oldest brother is totally blind. He's been blind since birth. He's 80 years old. He just retired last year. He's been gainfully employed for many, many years because the barriers have been removed for him. He worked for the IRS for over 25 years, and he's worked most recently for the Department of Education for over 10 years in Washington, D.C. He lives in Maryland. he would take the metro and go into work. And because those barriers have been removed, he's been able to work. He doesn't sit home and just collect a check. He's always been a hard worker. It's been an inspiration to me. So that's one of the reasons why I'm involved with the ADA Commission. So I'm glad to be here, and whatever help I can give to this commission, I would like to do that.
I'm Jocelyn Tavares. I am the director of the Dayton Public Library, and from a building perspective, I've seen where the physical structure of the library has been a barrier to patrons of all ages not being able to use the services we provide, from children to seniors. And that's pretty bothersome to the residents of the town who should be entitled to use the services. We've carried children down the stairs so that they can be a part of special story times and things. And at the same time, I'd like to be able to expand our programming and make sure that it is accessible to all members of our community. And I know we're not quite there or nearly close as we can be. I know that we can do more to enhance our web presence and maybe be a model to other departments in the town, or be a leader in that way to try to, I feel like we're one of the more public facing departments in town, in that we could be doing better to bring our services out to the entire community, and I'd like to do that.
Maya?
Jen, can you hear?
I can hear it now. Yes. Was somebody just speaking?
There's someone speaking who's not. Yeah. He's not on mute. Yeah. Do you want to? Yeah. Jonathan, you're muted just because of the echo. So can you *6?
Okay, Jen, can you hear me now?
I can. Thank you.
Okay. Yep. So my name is Kevin Smith. I've lived in Dayton for about 8 years. My oldest daughter, who's 9 and just starting 4th grade, was born with a spinal cord defect known as spina bifida. So she uses a wheelchair for all of her mobility. We've experienced, issues with the library, with the parks, with other areas around town. So when I saw that this commission was being formed, it was something that I felt was important for me as an advocate for her, because we plan on staying in town for hopefully the rest of our lives. So it was just a nice opportunity to be able to step in and make a difference, not just for her, but for everybody. it helps having lived these, having the real life experience of knowing what it's like to have somebody in a wheelchair and not be able to get them to places that they need to go or would like to go. So that's why I'm here, and hopefully we can make some major improvements.
And Jen, how about you?
Hi, everybody. My name is Jennifer Vichkowski. I moved to Dayton 10 years ago this November after we had a sudden fire in our apartment. And we lived with a family member, and then we subsequently bought our house here that following summer. So we've been residents full-time in our house for 9 years. I have 2 children in the school system. My son has a diagnosis of autism, ADHD, and developmental coordination disorder. And we have had some accessibility issues in town with him. Jocelyn, I'm glad that you're here. The library is definitely one of them. We love the library. We've been going to the library since they were infants. But it became evident as he got older, he needed assistance with toileting a lot longer than many typical developing children. And to assist a child in the bathroom in that library is very challenging because there's no privacy. You basically have to leave the door open in order to assist them. And so I've worked the last couple of years with the CPAC at the Dayton Rehoboth School District. I most recently have served as the president. I just felt like my tenure there was time to transition and hopefully be a little bit more effective in another position. And at the town level, this was a really great opportunity to do that. I have a background in education, starting with early intervention. So I've worked with all kinds of students with all different kinds of abilities. And I am really excited to work with you all and see what we can do for the betterment of our whole town.
Thank you all very much. I appreciate it. So first things first, I'll just mention that we have 5 of us so far. 4 of us are voting members. Ken is the liaison. He's going to be as contributory as he can, with the exception of being able to vote. And that's because of his relationship with the Board of Selectmen as the liaison for us and with us. Other than that, he is fully involved with everything that we do. We can have up to 9 members. The key factor is that we're supposed to have a majority, which is technically 51 or 50.01% of people who either have a disability or are related to a person with a disability or a family member with a disability. So for example, I'm blind. We've got, technically, if you look at voting members, we've got 1, 2, 3 out of the 4 voting members have a direct relationship to disability. So we meet that criteria going forward to start. Hopefully we'll continue that criteria with a couple of more people, while we obviously have it open for other people to join. If you happen to know a few good people along the way who would be interested, I'll put that out there. Feel free to pass us along. The more the merrier. And I'll go with our agenda a little bit. I know I gave everybody some material yesterday, which I apologize for it being so late, but there were some computer issues to make sure that everything could go out the way it was supposed to. And with Karen's help from the Board of Selectmen, we got that taken care of yesterday, and with our computer folks. So I think we should be good to go going forward in the future. I will do my best to get everything to everybody much earlier from now on. And I'll start by saying, anytime anybody has any concerns or questions, feel free to email me, call me, almost 24/7. That's perfectly fine. I'm always open to having conversation, returning calls or emails if necessary. So since I can't see what I put together yet, because I'm not, can't do things with too many hands at one time, could somebody tell me what the first thing I had on the agenda was?
The discussion of the KMA.
Okay, so thank you. So the KMA report came about because we felt as a town, in order for us to move forward and understand what we need to do to make our town as accessible as possible for the next many years, we needed to have a study done for our residents to know what needs to be addressed, for the Board of Selectmen to know what needs to be addressed, and for the FinCom to know what needs to be addressed. So myself, Mallory, and Ken worked on putting together the criteria for the grant that was funded, which was just under $30,000 last year, in order to have KMA through the Mass Office of Disability come in and do this very long, involved study that involved we looked at everything in the town we could think of that needed to be looking at, from playgrounds, outside of buildings, inside of buildings, even closets, ramps, stairwells, everything. We did not, unfortunately, extensively look at the schools, with the exception of the places where there's general public access, such as the gymnasiums, the cafeteria, ramps going in and out, and that includes the high school. And the reason we didn't, before we go too far into this, is because to do the high school, the middle schools, and the elementary school completely is very, very expensive. That's another grant down the road, and that's a completely separate process to do it. So we went for the funding that we thought we could get, which was to do the buildings and the outer structure of the town. Again, cursory for the schools on where public would have access for public meetings and so forth for now, plus ramps. The process for getting the grant was we submitted the grant last October. We were approved in, I think, late November. And then we had to get everything done by the end of this June. So that meant that we had to be able to have the study done. And that presented some challenges with COVID, of course, because a lot of it has to be done in person, as well as, you know, the back and forth things that went back and forth with the town departments and the public and all the comments that people made and so forth. So it was a challenge, but we got it done. I think the main body of the report is, what, 80 or 90 pages, 93 pages, I think. But it covers a lot of everything. It tells us what we're doing right. It tells us what we're not doing yet. There's not a question of necessarily doing anything wrong, but it tells us how much we have to do, which is a lot. The town has never formally before, up until now, up until we as a commission, as a body are here, the town has never formally done things to hold itself accountable for what it's doing for ADA. Yes, we have ramps. Yes, we have certain structures that were made and so forth in certain ways. And sometimes they're fully up to current standards. Sometimes they're not fully up to current standards. So that's a lot of what we're going to address. We're going to use the KMA report, I hope, for some of what we're doing as our guide going forward to what we want to do, when we want to do it, and how we want to do it. I'm thinking that as we go forward, we might want to consider starting with the things in the report that are easier to be done, do not require a lot of expense, or in some cases, no expense to be done, so that we can get ourselves in the position of beginning to do things, beginning to ask questions, beginning to get different department heads to work with us to become more proactive. So we may want to start looking at some of the town policies and make sure they're fully inclusive for people with disabilities. We may want to look at town contracts to make sure they have language that covers people with disability, because we technically over time have to cover that kind of language, even in all the town contracts and in the agreements, and even consulting contracts have to have language. We want to make sure we have postings around town. We want to make sure our signage is correct in different places. Those are things that we can address relatively simply. So I'm going to suggest that everybody look this over if you haven't already, so that when we have our next meeting, we can really get into how we want to begin to do some of these prioritizations. I'm going to stop there for a minute because I want to see if anybody has any questions.
Can you hear me? Do I have to start sex again?
You have to start.
So
Okay,
so if anybody wants a hard copy of it, you can let me know, and I'll have the office print up copies. I know I have a hard copy. I don't know if it's any easier for anybody. I know that it's been sent to everybody, but if you want a hard copy, I can arrange to have that for our next meeting. I'll leave it at town hall. So just let me know.
Jen, have you had a chance to take a look at any of this yet?
Sorry, did you say that it was sent to us?
Yes, yesterday.
Okay, I'm not sure I received it.
Did you get a big email from me with a whole bunch of things?
No, I did not.
Because it didn't bounce back to me. That's why I'm assuming you got it.
Okay, let me take another quick look to see, but I have my email open in front of me and I'm not seeing anything there. Oh, okay, nope, I might be wrong. Was it a reply? Yes, it was a reply. Okay, I see it now. Sorry about that. I have not had a chance to review.
Okay, so there's like 10 documents there. I think you see a whole bunch of attachments. Is that right?
If you want to see another slide, that way
Yes, I do.
Okay, so we'll keep that on the agenda for the next meeting anyway. But a couple of the things you might want to cursory look at in a few minutes, or Jocelyn, I don't know if she can put them up on the screen. Not this one, of course, because it's much too big and too involved. But I would suggest to look at it. Kevin, I don't know if you've had a chance to look at it yet. I'm sorry?
I did.
Okay.
Through a good portion.
All right. I don't know if Kevin has any thoughts on it yet or not.
I do. It's kind of the same thing you touched on, is really just prioritizing where we're going to start, and I guess start. For me, I got safety issues are always going to be, I think, should take precedence, and then work from there. But obviously, once everybody has a chance to review it, then we can kind of come up with a little bit better game plan, because it is a ton of information to absorb at once.
It really is. And that's, frankly, we can put a whole meeting into it easily, into just absorbing everything that there and discussing the different areas and answering some of the questions. One of the things we have to look at fairly early on, for example, is our website, and making the website accessible and making the materials that get posted accessible, and making sure that we are able, from going forward, from today forward, at least for this body and eventually everything else in town, that we're inclusive and we can set up the parameters for people who are deaf or hard of hearing, who need support or may want to attend meetings, to have the supports they need by contacting us and letting us know in advance that they want that. People, if they want things in alternative formats, things like that, such as Braille, or if they need it in audio format. So these are things that we can learn as we go along to put parameters in, to have addressed, so that when somebody says they need something, we can be proactive. But it's going to take time. One of the things that we need to think about is that by doing this, what we're also doing is proactively avoiding deliberately ourselves from any kind of a state or federal lawsuit. There are some towns around here who have been sued by the Justice Department over the past several years because they haven't been proactive and didn't have a plan to start with. So we have a plan. We want to be proactive. We don't just want to have the plan sit and collect dust, because eventually, otherwise, if we were sued, we would be held accountable. And as long as we're able to do the work that we're tasked with doing and show that we're making progress, I think that we would be in good shape. But we've got to continue to make progress, even if it takes 10 years. That's okay, as long as we're making some progress with it. So I'll suggest we put the plan aside, and when we talk about our next meeting, we'll put it on the agenda for our major discussion for the next meeting.
Do I have to do star six every time? Okay, I'm all set.
You're okay.
Okay, so before the commission, we had enough members. You and I sat down with our town administrator, Mallory, and discussed going for a grant. Now, the grant has to be in by October 9th, and we originally talked about getting a grant to do some engineering study for us for an elevator for the town hall, but that's kind of fallen through. So is there another grant that we can go for example, a smaller grant? I know that Kevin's talked about the parks, and they address it in this report here. So I'm just wondering, since it's not a lot of money, but we should be thinking about applying for a grant for the parks. Now, you and I happen to look in to the different parks to see what the problems were. Some of them were that wheelchair was people weren't able to go with a wheelchair to certain areas of the park. That some of the tables weren't ADA compliant. I know some of the width of the gates may not be correct. So are those things that maybe we can address, go for a grant now and address that?
So the answer to the question is yes. And let me elaborate on that a little bit. So the reason the grant deadline from the Mass Office of Disability is October 9. And again, it's the same criteria as last year. Depending upon what we're going for, assuming we're approved, which would be late November, early December when we get our answer, we have to utilize the funds and complete whatever we're doing by the end of June next year. And there are no extensions to that unless, I mean, even this year with COVID, we were allowed to get our report in late, but we had to still have the work done by June. So having said that, I just got this morning, and I noticed it on my way here, so I haven't sent it to anyone yet. We got some information from Ken Rhymes, excuse me, what's Mr. Rhymes' first name? Timothy Rhymes, thank you. With an engineering plan or a design plan that I have, I mean, I can't see it, but that's what it says in the email. For anybody who would be listening to this later, I am totally blind. So I can't see these things. They have to be explained to me sometimes so that I know what we're talking about. I did have vision at one time, so I'm very good at putting visuals together. Having said that, I just got this before we came here today. So I'm gonna send it out to all of you later. These are the initial engineering designs that he says he got from the firm that first firm he spoke to recently. So if this is a plan that meets with everybody's approval and it has everything we need in there, or at least some of it to get going, we're going to want to make a decision at least pretty quickly on what we think we want to do, because we may want to ask for $20 or $25 or $30,000 or more from the grant. The problem with asking for the full boat, if you will, from the grant is we want to potentially, the town would like to go back to the grant. We cannot ask them for money for engineering. They will not pay for an engineering study. So they'll pay for project studies. They'll pay for things like we just did for the accessibility study around town, but they will not pay for engineering grants. But then they will potentially fund the projects that you want to do. If we ask for too many things, too many years in a row, we're not going to get too many bites at the apple. They might fund us 2 or 3 years in a row for different things, but they're not going to do it every year because every town in the Commonwealth, 350 some odd towns, wants something from them, and they only fund anywhere from 12 to 25 projects a year. They have about $3 million to work with roughly. So I know the town wants to go back to MOD next year or the year after. There's the potential for doing the engineering study soon, for the ramp at Town Hall, for an elevator at Town Hall, and adding a couple of other things into that engineering study as well. And these would be engineering studies focusing on ADA. So that's what they would be focused on when the company is contracted to do it. They'd be looking at what needs to be done to make them accessible, make some of the lavatories at Town Hall more accessible, make the downstairs entrance more accessible, things like that as well. That study is probably going to be between $20,000 and $30,000, not covered by a grant. So if we put in for a grant for the playground and we're asking for $25,000, we have to be clear about what that $25,000 is going to cover and how it's going to be augmented. Because remember, the project has to be finished by next June. So where's the rest of the money going to come from, and what are the resources? So I know that it's something I have with Ken talked to Mallory about. Mr. Rhymes and I have talked about it a couple times over the past few years. And now we're in the point of looking at plans. Kevin, I know you're more into looking at.
Yeah, can I interject?
Yep, please go ahead.
I believe that it's going to be public knowledge that Mr. Rhymes is going to step away from an elected position in the Parks Department, correct? But he wants to stay.
Yeah, he's not the chairman anymore.
But I didn't know. I remember watching one meeting where he said he was just going to step away from, I believe it was the park, but I'm not 100% sure. So
I'm not sure either. I know that he stepped down, but he wants to be part of the Parks and Recreation for a little while because there's a new chairperson.
okay. It's well-known public knowledge that I want the chairperson seat in the Parks Department. I think personally, like I would almost, or at least come April, I know Tim's seat is available, so I might even run for that seat just to get on the Parks Department. I personally would rather wait until I am actually emerged in the Parks Department before we even discuss using any of that available money for that, because there's private grants beyond stuff from the state that we can explore. Like for instance, there's one company called Noah's Playground who does grants for, it doesn't have to be a private playground. It's public, it's schools, etc. So there's a lot of exploration, I think, that needs to go into that. And like Jonathan was saying, like we don't want to take that money and not have a real, I would rather have just a really great plan in place than try to, make a couple improvements. From what I read in the report, there's, besides the parking issues, I think some of the things that we need to address at the park might be, a little bit smaller scale, that we might be able to, do that without grant money, but obviously I don't know. I'm new to this, so I don't know what, the budgets look like for the Parks Department and so on and so forth. So
Kevin's right. There are other potential grants out there. The one that he mentioned, for example, there's that Kaboom has grants, Kabloom it's called, I guess, company. And I get things from them all the times about helping smaller towns like us, not only with the grant itself for build, but with design and development.
Right.
So those may be the way we want to go, is to look at some more of those other private grants or foundation grants to do some of that. Jen, I know you said you have a background in doing some grant writing.
Yes, I do. I know Little Tykes is another one that does playground specific grants, and they have quite a bit of accessible products available. I'd have to look into it a little bit further. But as far as grant writing, I'm happy to help however I can.
So so far, unless Jocelyn has something different, or Ken, your feelings too, it sounds like the consensus would be, at least for now, for us to talk to Mallory, the town manager, about other aspects of how the grant can be used, knowing that this year it's the feeling of the ADA Commission that we not look at a grant for the playground potentially, and look at it down the road. Now, having said that, if we tried to do it next year, but the town wants to look into the elevators, for example, at an elevator or a ramp, we're not going to be able to use that source. So I want to get some thoughts here, because we're going to, as we go through the day here, we're going to ultimately need to start to make some motions, because we have to do it formally.
So if I can just comment on that, I do agree with Kevin that maybe we should hold off on this grant. There are a lot of issues that I'm not aware of. So for example, I got a phone call from a resident in town who wants a fence around the park that's over here because they have an autistic child, and they're afraid the child's going to run and they can't catch the child near the road. So that's something that we seriously have to think about. The other thing is that we're talking about a park in North Dayton, right? Is that what Tim gave you? Is it just North Dayton, or did he give you stuff for all the parks in town?
I believe what I have is the engineering study for North Dayton only, but I'm not going to say that for sure until I'll send it out to everybody later this evening.
So that's been in the plans for a few years now. So I don't mind holding off on that. So, and my understanding is that park will be ADA compliant fully. That's going to be our park in town, that anybody who has a child that has a disability can go to that park and not worry about anything there. Doesn't mean that we don't do other things with our other parks. But I do think, I'm not on the Parks and Recreation. We want somebody on the Parks and Recreation that will be looking into this kind of stuff. So I don't mind holding off on that, but we won't be eligible. We're probably going to go for a grant for the elevator, because that's kind of like a big item in the ramp for the town. And just so everybody knows, I know that Jocelyn, we may be going before the town at our November meeting, asking for $105,000 or $110,000, somewhere around there, to make the second floor ADA compliant, which means we have to have a second egress. We can't open up the library until we have a second egress on each floor. So we're talking about the main floor right now. It's about $105,000, $110,000. I thought that's what Jim said. We will move the ramp in the front, put another door on the side probably, and have a ramp going that way. Make the bathrooms ADA compliant. I believe it's going to end up taking your office probably away from you. But this is something we're going to go. We're not going to grant for that. We're going to be asking the town The town is going to be very conservative at our special town meeting. We have maybe 1.5 million dollars in free cash. We're not going to spend it all. As you're familiar with what happens in town, every department comes looking to take our money. We notify all the departments. This is the time of year because of COVID-19. We don't know what revenue is going to be for the town and all this other stuff. So we're really going to limit it. But this is one of the things that we spoke, the board seems to be in agreement that we ought to ask the town taxpayers for the $105,000. So it just makes that main floor successful. Now, it's no secret that I'm advocating for a new library.
Well, I was just going to ask that. Has that ship kind of sailed on us for a while?
My personal opinion is it sailed on us for a little while because of the financial situation. So we've been okay for a grant, but it's not been funded for to update the library, put a second floor in the library, and other stuff, make it ADA. I'm not in favor of that. I'm in favor of a new library. I think it's cheaper to build a new library. For example, that's $8 million. State's going to give us $4 million. It's going to cost the townspeople $4 million. I think we can get a new library, $4 million. We pay $2 million, and the state pays $2 million, and it'll be one floor. But the building, where the library is right now, that building is still a town building, so we can use that for other stuff. So even though we're going to ask them, so they're not going away, and it has to be ADA compliant anyway. So we're just talking about that main floor right now, so that we can open up the library. Right? Frankly, we're not going to get a. If suddenly the town told us that the state told us that we got $4 million for the library, I'm going to say no, for that library, adding on to that because of COVID-19 and everything else. And there are other towns. We're number 17 on that list. These other towns have already said we don't want it right now. We can't afford it right now. So we could be moving up pretty quick on that. I'm in favor of a new library right next to town hall, quite frankly, and that's what I'm advocating for. It doesn't mean that the town should not spend money to maintain that building. So, and it'll be a better ramp, and the bathrooms will be ADA compliant. Won't be able to use the basement.
So
Won't be able to use the basement for the public. And there's an attic area which I've never been in, but there's an attic, so the public can't go there either. But that's the plan. Sorry, John.
that's okay. Jocelyn, do you have any thoughts, or Jen?
I always thought a new building made more fiscal sense. We're limited at that site. We love the building. There's only so much we can do, and we were limited at that grant round. The only reason we pursued that was because we had lost even more space at the bottom level. We had more space for patrons downstairs, and we had to close our space for teams. So our hands were tied a little bit. We kind of forced the issue to expand, and we were limited to that site. So now we're in a spot again, and so, yeah.
So, I mean,
Jen, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I've served with the Friends and on the building committee for a couple of years with the library, and I think it's hard, Jocelyn, right? Because what we want something to happen, right? Because the situation that we're in right now is like not accessible for anyone at all. But I think the bigger, longer term solution is a new building. And I grew up in Lakeville. We had a almost identical building to what we use for a library. And that was my childhood library, very inaccessible. The stairways were just awful. And then they went through the same process, and they have a one floor, beautiful library that is fully accessible and able to be used by so many different groups in town for so many different reasons, and programming has expanded. I think I would love to see that happen in Dayton, and it really can become a place, we talked about the inaccessibility of so many meeting places in town. Really, if we're building something new with all of the coding that's up to date, I feel like that's our best case scenario.
So let me suggest, since we're all getting used to what we're doing here for the first time, and we have to do things formally. The first thing we need before we even go any further, because it was on the discussion block, if you will, for a potential playground, is we need a motion regarding the playground. And I don't know if anybody's familiar with making motions. I know Ken is to some extent because of the, the things he's already involved in town. So I'm going to make the first motion because we don't have a formal chair. We won't do that till the end of the meeting today. And then we'll see if anybody wants to second it. But my motion is going to be that we tented that for now, we table any movement on supporting a grant through the Mass Office of Disability to help us with the North Dayton Playground until we've had an opportunity to review the engineering plans and look into other types of grants and do further study. And that was seconded by Kevin. Is there any more discussion on that particular motion? So all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? So that motion passes unanimously, unless I didn't hear somebody. What I will say, and this is going on the side a little bit, but I think it's important to throw this out there, is even with regard to the $105,000 or $110,000 that might be on the table potentially for the library at this point, is this is going to kind of go through the heart of, there are a lot of things in town, whether it's the library, whether it's the park, whether it's the track area behind town hall, whether it's doorknobs, literally, and handles, whether it's the streets and the sidewalks and the ramps. One way or another, for the foreseeable future, almost everything in the town that needs to be approved is going to have to go through ADA. So we really are going to have a lot of work ahead of us as a committee or as a commission, and potentially as subcommittees too, because we need to be able to go out and make sure when the engineers do the sidewalks that the ramps are correct and that they're at the right angles and so forth. And I'm happy to do a training and teach everybody how to do that. And I have the equipment that we need to do it and levels that do it and so forth as well. But we're going to have to look at almost everything in town for a while. That's going to go through us, and we're going to have to learn how to hold various committees and different groups that meet and so forth responsible, and also get the town department heads to be accountable to what they need to be doing to ask us for support or to report information to us. A lot of things we're just going to be giving a thumbs up or thumbs down. It's not going to be a big deal, but we have to know it so that if it doesn't meet ADA standards going forward, we can say, Houston, we have a problem. And I'll use the discussion for the library as the example, and then we'll go back to the agenda. Even though it's an older building, there are certain regulations that the state requires when you're doing modifications to an older structure between the value of the land, the value of the building, and the value of the construction. And if those don't all align, then we have to ask for a variance from the Commonwealth in order to go forward with the construction. If they do align, we don't necessarily have to ask for the variance, but in a lot of cases we do. So I'm going to use an example from one of the items on our agenda. This may be out of order, but I have on the agenda for today the ramp in this building. I don't know if you have that up there or, but we have one of the items on the agenda today is the ramp in this building to go from the inside door, and we're here, Jen, so I can't show it to you because I can't see it. But inside the door to the stage. So the original proposal is to have the ramp come inside the door, go up to the stage, and the ramp that originally is proposed would be just under 10 feet. But when you do that just under 10-foot ramp, the angle is too high. It doesn't give us the right grade. It's above an 8% grade. So in order to have the right ramp length, we have to go over 10 feet to about 10 feet 8 inches, I think it is. But then decreases the wheelchair turn radius at the top, which is supposed to be a 50-inch radius, and it would decrease it. So, first of all, this sounds like something simple, but in order to actually get to do that ramp with that decreased radius so that we can keep to the right level, if you will, or the right grade, or be below the grade, in order to decrease that radius at the top, we have to ask the State Architectural Access Board for a variance waiver. Otherwise, they can come in and tell us to tear it apart and redo it. This is not an expensive project. This is a project that I think Jim Aguilar has said would cost no more than a couple of $1,000s to do internally with, you know, his guys from the town here. But we can't do it until we get an approval for that. In order to do that, what I've given you all is a copy of the application that we have to fill out to the Architectural Access Board. So part of what they're going to look at there is, again, this is an older historic building, and there's places on there to fill that in. They're going to look at the square footage of the building. They're going to look at the value of the building, of the property here, versus the allowable amount for construction. This will meet the criteria because it's a minimal amount of expense to do what we're doing, and because it's an older building and there's no other possible way to mitigate. But in order to do that, we have to a lot of times go through these waivers and file for these variance requests. And we may have to do that a lot because we're an older town. So I just want to make everyone aware of that. I'm gonna be sending this variance request, if everybody says it's okay, to Mallory and Jim to fill out what they can and then get it back to me, and I'll fill in the rest. And I'll try to have this filed by the end of next week. And of course, I'll send you all copies of everything that we're doing so that you know. But if somebody can make a motion so that we can actually move this forward and I can work with Mallory and Jim on it, that would be great.
So can I just speak on this just for clarification? We have two options on the variance. We have the variance for the ramp going up. We can ask that to be shorter than what it's supposed to be. Gives us the 5 feet at the top of the ramp for wheelchair, or we can ask that the ramp be whatever the law says it has to be, cut into the area where the wheelchair is. And I believe it's, I'm not speaking for you, Jonathan, but I think the agreement is that the ramp would be the normal size it should be, and cut back a little bit on where the wheelchair would be.
The turn radius, yes.
Yeah, so we, initially when we talked about the ramp, we talked about putting it over here, so we would not have had to be issuing the variance. However, I think it was Mr. Aguirre who pointed out, the ramp to go outside is right there, the door is right there, if somebody has to go up on the stage, that's the ideal spot for it. And we would have had to have markers over here, but a lot of this bench would have been taken out. So all we had to do was take up the bench over there, and he actually over there to save the benches. So I think what we're looking for is a motion to ask for a variance for the turnaround.
For the turn radius, yes.
Turn radius.
I had spoken to the folks actually at Mass Office of Disability to get their opinion based on what was originally put together before we had the commission established here. Ken and myself met with Jim Aguiar. We came up with a couple possibilities, and then I proposed, I discussed those possibilities with the Mass Office of Disability. They came back with another recommendation, which was in terms of shortening the radius by about 3 or 4 inches, I think 3 inches, shortening the radius at the top for the wheelchair turn in order to give us the distance that we need to be at or below the grade we need to be at. So if somebody can make a motion for us to be able to move forward this summer, and then we'll go forward with another motion on it. But I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on this.
I'll make a motion.
I second.
So the motion is to ask for the variance for the shorter term radius. And that was seconded by Jocelyn. The motion was made by Kevin. And all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So that's unanimous as far as I can tell. The next thing would be, I can potentially work with Jim and Mallory on this, unless somebody else would like to take this on and I can pass it off to them. I don't mind it at this point yet because we're just getting going here.
I mean, I could take the reins on that too. I know Jim well, and I haven't personally met Mallory yet, but I don't have a problem coordinating and reaching out and setting up something with Jim to get that going.
So then I would suggest, I'll make a motion that Kevin, I can, if everybody's agreeable, I can send these over to you tonight and I can send you the recommendation from the state also. And then if you want to reach out to both Jim and Mallory over the next few days and have them fill in what they can and then whatever you want to do. And then if you get it back to me, I'll set it up and get it into the state. So I'm going to make a motion that Kevin be the point person to work on the application for variance that's going to go to the Architectural Access Board in conjunction with our town manager and our building inspector.
I'll second that.
And that was motion made by Jonathan and seconded by Jen. Any discussion? None. All approved?
Aye.
Aye.
Any negatives? No, they passed unanimously again. So far, we're 3 for 3 on unanimous. And what was the next item on my agenda, please?
Yeah, community garden accessibility.
So I don't know if anybody's heard about the community garden, but there is a proposal from the scouts through Tanya Patricio and a committee that they've put together to have a community garden in Dayton. And the community garden would tentatively be over, and again, I just got these plans last night and I haven't even copied them yet. So you don't have these at all, except the fact that it's on the agenda because it needs to be. And I'll explain where we're going with this. I still have to copy the plans and get them all to you, which I will along with the playground stuff for the next day or so. But what they're hoping is for the town, the house near Town Hall that's being moved, is that right, Ken?
It's up for auction right now.
That's up for auction and then hopefully being moved in the next couple of weeks. Behind that house, they wanted to build a 3,000 square foot, 4-bed community garden, and which sounds wonderful. And they were hoping that we would be able to help them by working with them to make sure that it's also fully accessible for people with disabilities, which I also think is awesome that they were reaching out to us, by the way, as one of our first potential project ideas to get involved with for somebody in town. Having said that, it's not going to be as easy as it seems. First of all, the project has to be reviewed by different town departments before it can go forward, even though I think it's the Agricultural Commission gave its blessing the other day. But in further discussion I've had, I've found that the town, there are other departments it's going to have to be reviewed by and committees in town to make sure it meets certain criteria. Second of all, I don't believe the area has been surveyed yet, so we don't actually know if all of that space and land is property of where the house is. And then the next item for that is we don't know, because I know that they were hoping eventually if the library went on that land, that community garden, if you will, would be something that would be augmented by having the library next door as an area where people could go and, reflect and have time and so forth as well, and relax, as well as, working in the garden. So what I've been told yesterday they want to do versus what we're able to do right now, we can't do anything yet from what I'm understanding from the information I got earlier today. So I put it on the agenda to bring it up for everybody for discussion, but I don't think that there's anything else we can do with it yet. I don't know if anybody else has any thoughts on this right now, but again, as I said, I think it's really nice that they want to have a community garden and they're reaching out to make sure that it's accessible to everybody right from the get-go.
Yeah, I heard about it last night on Facebook. So yeah, no information besides that in the works.
Yes, so the property next door to the town board, an acre of land, obviously the house is in the front. And if we're going to have a library, hopefully, we would be probably in the front, but they'd be parking over there also. As my position is that the community garden should be in the back. the land is not been surveyed, so we can't just go put these beds in and do all this work without it knowing whether or not it's our property. That's number one. Number two, the house is up for auction. The auction now will end on September 29th, and they've got, I think, 15 days from that date to move the house. They'll move the house in 15 days. The winning bid gets to move the house, so the middle of October. Depending on the weather, they can stop putting beds in once the land is surveyed.
Was there a sale that fell through?
I don't,
From what I, heard. You can believe everything you see on Facebook.
I actually.
I think was involved that the plan was to put the community garden there once the house was moved, but it almost sounded like the house had been sold and would be moved by the end of September.
That's how that was how I read it as well.
yes,
That it was sold.
I'm speaking to the auction. They already closing the auction for the house. They did it too soon.
Oh,
So when you were bid, it wasn't a lot of money, but
right.
by it being auctioned off, the town is not spending $40,000. So whatever we get.
Jen, were you going to add something?
I was just going to add that I'm involved with scouting in town. My daughter is a Girl Scout. My son is a Cub Scout. And I attended a meeting with Mallory and Brett, Tanya, Jenna Barr, and a few other folks from town, where we went over to the piece of land behind the house. And we just stood there and kind of talked through what was happening. And Mallory had some pretty specific step-by-step things that had to happen. We do have a grant for this project as a town. So I would think that we would want to have Mallory involved in any further discussion so that we know exactly what's happening. I love that we, Tanya's thinking about getting us involved and thinking about that right away off the bat. I do know that we were thinking we couldn't even begin work until sometime in late October, November, which would really just be building. It would not involve any planting at that point in time. That would probably happen next spring. But the idea is to really have the children involved as much as possible in doing the work. So it would also might be nice for them to hear about accessibility and what kind of work goes into that as well, and why we're thinking about that throughout the process.
So I think that in terms of them getting ready this November or this winter, by the way they want to do the builds and so forth, I agree with you. It makes sense. Certainly Mallory has to be involved in this, and the Board of Selectmen is going to have to be involved in it as well. And there's going to have to be more discussion. I know that there is some grant money available, but I think that it's minimal from what I understand at this point. I don't think there's an extensive amount. I know there wouldn't be enough to make it ADA accessible. When I was out walking land yesterday with Tanya and my wife, there's a lot of uneven surfaces. The ground couldn't support a wheelchair at this point, for example. They'd have to put down some kind of a different surface in between the beds for wheelchairs to be able to be accessible, for walkers to be accessible, things like that. So it simply wouldn't be having the grassy surface there, because wheelchairs will sink. Walkers might get stuck. Those common factor things. As well as having an accessible point to it, to the opening of the fence, wherever that might be. So truthfully, I don't know if this will get off the ground this year. I think the idea is wonderful to build a sustainable garden, and I think to have us involved from the get-go so that they do it right in the beginning is a wonderful outreach, as I agree. But again, I put it on the agenda so we can have the conversation. I don't think there's anything here, unless somebody disagrees, that we need to vote on per se, but it's something that, again, we should keep on our radar, and I think we should perhaps have discussion with Mallory and the Board of Selectmen first. And also, we need to hear more from Tanya and the rest of the committee about the actual plans they have, because those plans ultimately could be changing based on what the town decides to do with some of that property. Any thoughts there?
I think I'm in agreement with that. That definitely is what we came away from that in-person meeting on the grounds about anyway, because there are just so many details up in the air. But even if we can contribute things like how far apart the garden beds should be, even if we can't grade the ground, those are kind of necessary pieces of advice to give now. So even if they're just drawing the plans, they can
Yeah.
take all of that into consideration.
And you know, it's interesting. I will say, Jen, I did speak to, when I was talking to the Mass Office of Disability this morning, and we were talking about that grant that we talked about earlier, and I asked them if they've ever funded any kind of a project like a community garden as a disabilities project. And the response I got was that they funded certainly, you know, playgrounds and structures for playgrounds, excuse me, but they, as far as he knows, he doesn't know of any thing that they funded specifically like this. And he said, you know, we look for new innovative ideas. So this would be a new innovative idea. But again, because we don't know what's going to happen, and Ken, maybe you can share some of this more. I know you've shared a little bit already. We don't know exactly how that land's going to go and what the surveys are going to show and what it's going to take. I don't think we're able to put in a grant for a request from MOD for that this year.
Yeah, I wonder if it would be worth tabling it for next year and thinking of an inclusive grant for the playgrounds and the garden at the same time, and sort of making it a, you know, fully inclusive Parks and Rec type of application for next year's round of grants.
I would think that that might be a really good possibility because.
Or add one thing to this. Now, you can take for a private, the town can take a private building for a private, correct?
Ken?
I think the town can do people that run volunteer like gazebo and all that.
Well, I mean, from like an actual monetary value.
I think they probably can for specifics.
So just off the top of my head, I don't know if this is even a possibility, but I do a lot of electrical work for Arrow Slice Inductive that is fully organic, farm, sustainable, and their back project called Marion, who absolutely loves projects like this.
Yeah.
So that would be someone that I can reach out to, who, you know, such as through the Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts, they might be interested in helping fund that project because of what it is. And furthermore, something really nice for the groups, the Boy Scout and Girl Scout doing it, is the people from that farm would be absolutely more than willing to help them actually do the gardening portion of it. So, I mean, we can coordinate up with Iron and, you know, we have the funding just to make gardens, we have more to make them ADA. You know, we can absolutely look at possibilities.
Jonathan said, the past, I don't know why it has to be, I'm sure it can be just gravel necessarily, or wood chips, stuff like that, you're gonna be able to walk on. You don't have a design for what we're talking about. Right. Definitely, with support, you check it out, once we get a plan.
Right.
See if they will help, if it's organic. I've asked this to be organic, and, Tim, is in here to be organic, so I'm going to plan that.
Yeah, there's a process that he explained it to me last night. He explained the process to me last night. And they don't dig up the ground. They lay cardboard, they lay mulch, they put another surface down and so forth as well. And then, you know, they seed it, how everything grows. It sounds pretty fascinating, to be honest. But then that makes a difference on the surface that's put in the pathways, for example, because you don't want something that's going to intrude with the growth or something that's going to have a negative effect, or it could be poisonous as well. So those are things that still have to be worked out and looked at. And it sounds like, Kevin, the project you're involved, those folks would know some of those answers. In terms of what you're saying, Ken, in terms of the width of the pathways and so forth, again, for example, they talked about wanting a 5-foot width. What they really need is a 36-inch width. So they have more room to play with potentially, or more room to expand, depending upon how you look at it. As long as their radiuses, again, meet those 50 inches criteria. So that's just an example. it might make sense, Jen, I'm going to put you on the spot here, and suggest that maybe if Kevin could at least pass along the information that he has, and I'll follow it up too, to you, and maybe I could set up, if he can pass it along, a time for you and I to get together and have a conversation with Tanya maybe, and get more information and help start to look at some of this, even if it means we have to ask them to put it off till next year.
Yeah, I mean, I would be happy to be involved in that way.
Kevin, so would you be able to pass some information along to Jen?
Yes, I can give her, well, we can, talk through email and figure out what kind of information you need, and I can, at least open up the lines of communication to the people that I mentioned, and see if they're interested, and then I can let you guys ask for permission, kind of take over from there.
And having said that, just as an FYI, which I did not know this until recently, anything officially that we send by email, if you can CC me on it, first of all, because technically I'm supposed to keep those correspondence for 3 years, which I did not know until recently. So if there's things going back and forth with each other, if you could just see me so that we have a copy of it somewhere, and so that I'm in the loop on at least knowing what's going on as the coordinator, and I can, be a bug to different people to see that things are followed up. And if I get to be too much of a bug, feel free to swap me away.
Just so everybody knows, I'll email
So I'm going to make a motion that we ask Kevin to send in over some contact information, initial contact information to Jen, so that Jen and I can sit down with Tanya and her committee through scouting and begin to ferret out more of the ways that this would actually come about in the future. And that way we could all work collectively with the town also to determine if this is the right location and right site. That's a long motion, but. And that was seconded by Kevin. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Unanimous, as far as I can tell again. And moving right along from it, what was the next thing on my? I'm sorry?
elect officers.
Okay, so we have to elect officers. We need a treasurer, a president, a CFO. Just kidding. So we have to have the chairperson. Ken is not a voting member. He's the liaison person. So Ken cannot be considered the officers. Really what we need is the chair, the co-chair, and the clerk, and who would be the person who takes the minutes officially, although I will have them sent to me and do it for this one. Is there another position that we need at this point?
No, it's chair, vice chair.
And clerk, right?
Clerk.
So we need chair, vice chair, and clerk. So there's 4 of us. So does anybody want to nominate somebody else or nominate themselves? No takers yet.
I will nominate, I will nominate myself to chair or vice chair.
Okay, I can nominate myself as chair or vice chair too. I'm willing to be chair, and the reason I say that is because one way or another as the coordinator, everything's going to go through me anyway, but that doesn't mean I have to be the chair.
I think that's fair.
Okay, so, go ahead.
Yeah, so you nominate yourself as chair.
Yeah, so does anybody want to second me as the chair? And Kevin seconded that. So then we have anyone up for vice chair?
I'll nominate myself for vice chair.
So we have Jen nominated for vice chair. Anybody want to second that?
I'll second.
And Jocelyn seconded that. And so we have 2 more people to fight over the clerk's position.
Want me to do it? I don't care.
If you don't mind.
I don't mind doing it.
Okay,
I'm gonna nominate Jocelyn.
so Jocelyn has offered to be the clerk, and that was seconded, that was nominated by, well, Jocelyn nominated herself.
I'll
Kevin
second that. Oh, there we go.
Okay, so Kevin had seconded it, so we'll go with that. So we have, the nominations are Jonathan Gale as the chair, Jen Skowski, did I pronounce it right, I hope?
You did great.
You know, it's all those years of
I
practice.
usually put you,
As the vice chair, and Jocelyn as the clerk. So that's the motion. And we have seconds for all of those. Any discussion? We're voting the slate. All those in favor?
Right?
Aye. All those opposed to the slate? For the opposing parties? None. Again, unanimous again. What else do we have so far?
we have to set up the next meeting.
So there's another, I don't even know what time it is right now. Does anybody have the time? 4:20, okay. So a couple of, I'm going to go to some housekeeping things because this is the start of what we're doing, of course, today. I'd like to set up our next 3 meetings if we could, so that we have them on our calendars. I know that we're going to have a number of things that we want to do in the next 3 meetings. One is going to be to start to really look at the KMA report and prioritize what we want to do and how we want to do it. Another thing is going to be to look at our web accessibility. Another thing was going to potentially look at procedures and policies in town as time goes on, but we'll have to decide how we want to do that at our next meeting. Another one is going to be to look at our open space in town a little bit, again, in conjunction with the KMA report. But then also, the Mass Office of Disabilities, who's at Jeff Dugan, is the point person there, would like to be able to either come out and meet with us or meet with us remotely to go over our duties and responsibilities and our bylaws, which we have to establish. So one of the things that I gave everyone in the packet is a document that shows potentially what our bylaws would look like and how we have to carry them out and what we have to do. And again, if you look at the bylaws that I gave everybody the draft for, and I filled everything, and I think with Town of Dayton and so forth as well, it's pretty extensive. And it goes to the heart of what I said earlier about one way or another, our gloves kind of touch a lot of what goes on in town. So that, you know, we have to decide where we're gonna pick our battles, what we're not, what we're gonna start with, what we're not, what we might, you know, have a couple of subcommittees going to look at some different things. So we might have one subcommittee working on the policies, procedures, and contracts, another working on open space, but we're gonna have to go into some subcommittee work as well, which will mean that everybody's gonna have to try and think about committing, in, at least in the short term, an extra couple hours other than the committee time, so that we can get a handle on things. I think once we also have a few more members, that will make it easier for the committees in terms of how work is dispersed. And I would hope in several months' time that, you know, a couple of months down the road, we could go to once a month as well, because we'll have everything that we're doing, you know, much more succinct and so forth. So for the next 3 meetings, for the next meeting, I'm proposing if we have something roughly about 2 weeks between each of these, so that the next one we can look at the plan and we could focus most of our time on the plan, if not all of the time, because there's a lot to absorb and go through. And any thoughts there so far?
I think I have a
doctor's appointment on October 1st in the afternoon. I just don't know.
Okay, so
but I'm not a voting member.
Jen, what works for you? Do you always want to go remote? Will you be able to join us directly? Tell us, I mean, for your,
I think,
I'm asking for
yeah,
Sorry?
moving forward, I should be able to join in person. Tuesdays and Thursdays are the best for me because I'm sort of forming a bubble with my cousin and my sister-in-law for oversight of remote learning. So they will be in charge of children on Tuesdays and Thursdays so that I can try to schedule as many of my meetings on those days as possible.
Okay. For me, Tuesdays and Thursdays are the best for me. My only, we, 3 o'clock is tough for me. I don't know what everybody else's schedule looks like. If we could do maybe with like a half hour, 3:30, we'd be able to stress our meeting.
Okay, the only reason we did 3 o'clock this time is because there was a meeting scheduled here for 5 o'clock. So, and I didn't know how much time we would actually need for this first meeting just to get off the ground. Jocelyn, what about you if we met in this space?
I'm probably going to be here in this space during this time anyway, or at the library, so it's no problem for me to get over here.
So for the next meeting, proposing, and Jocelyn, I don't know if you have access to the schedule for this building.
Yeah, I can look it up or request.
Okay. So if we were to look at potentially Tuesday,
Let me.
what's
The 29th.
Tuesday the 29th at 3:30?
Oh, you know what? Tuesday the 29th isn't good for me personally, but I have a doctor's appointment that day.
And Ken, you said that the Thursday is not good for you, right?
If it was later, maybe it's like 4 o'clock.
Can everyone do 4 o'clock in this building? Jocelyn, can you do that? On October 1st?
Yeah, October 1st I can.
And Jen?
Yeah, that sounds good for me.
Okay, so why don't we schedule the next meeting for Thursday, October 1st at 4 o'clock.
Okay.
And then what about the next,
The 15th and 29th.
the 15th and the 29th? Potentially same bat time, same bat station, as they say. Again, we have to see if there's something else going on here at 5 o'clock or 5:30.
So far, it doesn't look like it.
So if we could block off, Jen, if you're doing this, looking at the schedules there. I mean, I know, I think I have to submit this also to Jim Aguiar and to the Board of Selectmen or put it on the calendar, but I would block off 2 hours for each meeting. So 4 to 6 on the 1st, 4 to 6 on the 15th, 4 to 6 on the 29th.
Yeah, it looks like it's clear on the town calendar.
Okay.
I think you can let Leanne know in the selectman's office. She notifies Jen.
Okay. That's what, so I'll let Leanne know. And then also for the next meeting, you know, I'm sure we'll have little things added here because people are starting to hear that we're out here. But the main thing on the agenda is going to be to really go over the KMA, the report, which also, as I said, has the sub-reports, which is the buildings, the exteriors. You might want to look at some of the other reports that have the recommendations, the surveys, things like that. I think that's what we're going to have to focus on for the whole time as much as we can.
Sure.
The meeting on the 15th, I was going to ask Jeff Dugan from MOD to join us as well. If not for the full time, at least for an hour of it so that we can go over what I sent you for bylaws and the other things that we have to do. And he can kind of fill in everybody and answer questions about our roles, responsibilities, you know, and all that's going forward. And then the 29th isn't, I'm not going to set anything for that yet because there'll be other things I'm sure that get added into each of these. Does that sound okay with everybody? Anybody have any thoughts?
Sounds great.
When you mentioned the web accessibility stuff,
Yes.
I've already run into a few tools that we could use for that project whenever you wanted to tackle it.
So what ultimately will happen for web accessibility is we're probably going to have to at some point have our website privately evaluated for accessibility. And it's not just for blindness, but it's for a lot of other aspects of accessibility as well. I just got an email a few days ago that I'll send around to everybody from one company that does it. There's a couple of other organizations that I know that do it as well, and that look at our accessibility needs and what it will take. So, and then there's the other part of it, which is when we put up documents, or the town puts up documents, so that all those documents fully translate as well. So if they're image documents, for example, they have to be translated to an OCR document. Otherwise, you guys can see the picture, but people like me or other people with other situations can't hear them if they can't read it or can't understand what they're reading. So it's more than simply making it accessible. There are tools out there, like you just suggested, Jocelyn. There are a lot of tools that we may want to ultimately have built into the website that allow us to do it going forward, so that it's easier for the town when we post things whoever's posting to be able to make sure it's accessible, to have it automatically, some of it will become accessible. But we may ultimately have to look at a contract for monitoring to make sure it stays accessible. So again, that's something that we can put on our radar for the, you know, the stuff we can work on in the early terms, in the next few weeks. Probably by the end of October, we can get that on our schedule. So I'm going to ask Jeff Dugan if he can come out on the 15th. If he can't, I'm going to ask him if he can come out on the 29th. And is there anything else on there that I forgot?
You want to say something?
Just wanted to add, you and I discussed, we both had an email from the Office of Disability, Massachusetts Office of Disability Disabled Training. Virtual training is going on October 29th. It's the same day as our meeting, but it's 9 to 1 o'clock.
Is that on the 29th?
It's the 29th.
Okay.
Massachusetts Office of Disability will be hosting the 6th Annual Disability Summit virtually on October 29th from 9 to 1 p.m. The 2020 Disability Summit focuses on reasonable accommodations within employment and socialization in the virtual world with a wide range of engaging speakers from state government, nonprofit agencies, healthcare, and disabilities organizations. The goal of this year's summit is to highlight combination self-care, socialization, and resources during the pandemic that can be applied to our personal and professional lives. As you and I talked, we don't know the cost for this. We can check it out, but maybe Jonathan, if you could forward this email.
Yeah, I'll forward this to each person. I don't know if there's a cost. I haven't looked at that yet either. If there is, if you want to join, and I want to make this really clear, if there's things that you guys are interested in individually, or you think we would be collectively, that relates to disabilities, knowledge, understanding, a summit, a seminar, a training session, whether it's down here in Boston, Washington, D.C., we'd all like a road trip. Probably not going to happen on our budget. But if there's things you think that we would be interested in, feel free to share it. And I really mean that. I know it's also hard to do things during the day sometimes. For example, I know, Kevin, you know, you and Jen and Jocelyn during the day, it might be hard to get involved in something like what Ken just mentioned. Having said that, it's also something that's going to be recorded and can be looked at later. I don't know that. But if it's something you're interested in, and even if there are fees involved, pass it and let me know. I will take it back to Mallory and to the Board of Selectmen. We do have a budget. It's not a huge budget this year. It's about $1,000. So we do have some money to work with in terms of doing some of these seminars and trainings and so forth. If it turns out we need more to get up to speed on some things or do some other training as it comes along, you know, or we have to travel to the western part of the state for seminars, there's reimbursement for gas mileage, things like that. If we had to stay at a hotel because that's what it required, we would ask them in ahead of time to get approved for those things so that we can do it. Doesn't mean it would always happen. Doesn't mean the funds would always be available. But unless we ask, we're not gonna be able to get a yes. So if there's things, Jen, that you can think of, for example, related to accessibility, you know, that may relate to the areas that you're interested in, even with your own children, because that certainly educates you to educate other people. Kevin, same for you. I think the more we can arm ourselves with what we want to know, the better off we all are. So I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on that or anything that they can think of, you know, within the domains of your own children's disability you can think of. Feel free to throw it out there. Anything? Jen, no thoughts?
Not at this moment, but I am, as I'm thinking about the garden, I'm wondering if there are specific agricultural accessibility things that we should be thinking about and looking into.
It sounds like maybe with what Kevin can send you to get you going into some research area, Kevin. It sounds like that might at least be a way to get going on accessibility based on what he said and what these groups have done. I don't know that. I don't know until he sends it and, you know, we get a chance to look at it. But, you know, we can also reach out to the state and see what they offer, and the state agricultural department and stuff as well, or department of whatever farming would be, I'm not sure, and see if they've done anything like this before and what they can offer us. Anyone else have anything else for now? So that this doesn't, I don't want to bore anybody. Is there anything else? I think, does that cover our agenda for now?
It does.
I think for today? So
I'll make a motion to adjourn, Jonathan.
I have a motion to adjourn, and I will get the recording from Jocelyn, and I will put the minutes together for this meeting, unless Jocelyn wants to do it.
If you want me to, I can.
If you're willing to, we have to get them out so that we can also, not only do we want to approve them in our next one, but we also need to get a copy to the town clerk so that she can post them to the town website once we approve them.
Once we approve them, right?
Yes, so once we approve them, then they go to, at our next meeting, hopefully, unless you get waylaid, don't worry about it. Then once we approve them, they will go to the town to be posted on the website.
I'll work on them.
Okay, great. So I have a motion to adjourn. Do I have a second? That's seconded by Kevin. All approved?
Aye.
Aye. Any objections or abstains? Unanimous all the way across the board today. Thank you, everybody, and I will be sending out a bunch of emails over the next few days.
Good night,
Thanks so
Jen.
much.
Good
Have a
night,
good
Jen.
night.
Thank you.